There's an interesting sort of side story to the hearing of former Attorney General Sally Yates and former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper before the Senate panel yesterday. Senator Ted Cruz, like many Republicans on the panel yesterday, tried to intimidate Sally Yates in a debate about the constitutionality of Donald Trump's majority Muslim country immigration ban. But Sally Yates was ready, and she destroyed Ted Cruz on his own turf, so much so that he bailed on the hearing and ran away. Ted Cruz just left after Sally Yates embarrassed him. So Yates earlier in the hearing explained to fellow Texan Senator John Cornyn that she decided to overrule the Office of Legal Counsel, which agreed with the Muslim ban, because she argued that you have to have laws based on the truth. Ted Cruz chose not to talk about the Russian meddling, which was sort of the purpose of the hearing, and instead just try to slam Sally Yates around the Muslim ban. This is so bad, Pat, that it is almost painful to watch. But let's watch it anyway. Cruz tries to use legalese against Sally Yates, and she throws it right back in his face.
Are you familiar with 8 U.S.C. Section 1182?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Well, it is the binding statutory authority for the executive order that you refused to implement and that led to your termination. So it certainly is a relevant and not a terribly obscure statute. Mm-hmm. By the express text of the statute, it says, quote, whenever the president finds that the entry of any alien or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate. Would you agree that that is broad statutory authorization?
I would, and I am familiar with that, and I'm also familiar with an additional provision of the INA that says no person shall receive preference or be discriminated against in issuance of a visa because of race, nationality, or place of birth. That, I believe, was promulgated after the statute that you just quoted. And that's been part of the discussion with the courts with respect to the INA, is whether this more specific statute trumps the first one that you just described. But my concern was not an INA concern here. It rather was a constitutional concern, whether or not this the executive order here violated the Constitution, specifically with the Establishment Clause and equal protection and due process.
Definitive. Yes, Ted, I know what you're saying. Here's the law I looked at, which, by the way, was codified after what you just quoted, period. Now, Ted Cruz, if he had had an ounce of common sense at this point, he would have bailed. But Cruz tried to stick with it and says that's exactly what someone who just disagrees with the politics of the bill would say. And that backfired on him as well.
There is no doubt the arguments you laid out are arguments that we can expect litigants to bring, partisan litigants who disagree with the policy decision of the president. I would note on January 27th, 2017, the Department of Justice issued an official legal decision, a determination by the Office of Legal Counsel, that the executive order, and I'll quote from the opinion, the proposed order is approved with respect to form and legality. That's a determination from OLC on January 27th that it was legal. 3 days later, you determined, using your own words, that although OLC had opined on legality, it had not addressed whether it was, quote, wise or just.
And I also, in that same directive, Senator, said that I was not convinced it was lawful. I also made the point that the Office of OLC looks purely at the face of the document, and again, makes a determination as to whether there is some set of circumstances under which some portion of that EO would be enforceable, would be lawful. They importantly do not look outside the face of the document. And in this particular instance, particularly where we were talking about a fundamental issue of religious freedom, not the interpretation of some arcane statute, but religious freedom, it was appropriate for us to look at the intent behind the president's actions, and the intent is laid out in his statement.
Totally out of his league here, and it showed. And Sally Yates using religious freedom arguments against a Texas Republican. Cruz almost immediately left the room. Just seconds after this ended, a picture of his empty chair was snapped there. Cruz even brought up Hillary Clinton's emails with James Clapper. I mean, the guy is just completely out of his league here.
I love how this happened because Cruz is often touted as some great orator and a Princeton debate champion and a guy who would wear these ostrich skin boots when he entered the courtroom.
Right.
He was out of his league here. He even got shut down by Donald Trump at one of those debates. Remember when they were talking about New York values?
Yeah, that's right. And it did not look good for him. He's had a couple of cringe moments over the last year and a half. I almost feel bad for him, except that he's so horrible for our country that it's hard to feel bad. Sally Yates didn't even have to answer these questions at all, right? She just could have said, Senator, I want to restrict my answers today to the subject matter of the hearing, not my legal career or whatever. But she dealt with it, and she dealt with it really, really well.